Okay, so the big thing about construction documentation is communication. So before we were moving things feet to inches, now we're trying to get from inches to fractions of inches. Things are starting, the concrete's starting to dry, it's starting to solidify. We're really honing in on it. Schedule's starting to be a thing. We want to get permits pulled. By this time, a lot of owners are just ready to pull the trigger. You know, in the schematic design phase, it was really visual, it was really exciting, it was something new. By the time we get through engineering and get into CDs, you know, you kind of already know what's happening. You're just kind of ready to pull the trigger on the permit set. The big thing here is communication. So who are we communicating to? Well, of course, we're going to have to communicate to the general contractor. And hopefully, if you've taken my advice, the general contractor has been involved since pre-design. They're well aware of the design, and now it's just about communicating all those little specifics and honing in on that kind of on those kind of pragmatic variables that maybe they missed out on. Another thing that is going to be they're going to be communicating to is their subs. So the framers, you know, the framers, the plumbers, the electricians, all those people need to be involved. And as we've made our way through pre-design, that of course all that information has been layered on top of each other. But as we get closer to CDs or finishing CDs, hopefully that number from the general contractor is starting to solidify just as the design is. So you may be getting price per square foot, you know, over here in pre-design. By the time you get into design development, hopefully they're having conversations with the subs, trying to get a little bit of feedback on what we're actually starting to use. And then at the end of CDs, hopefully you have a hard number that you can really put your hat on. So again, as we're progressing through the design, hopefully we're progressing through that budget as well. So who else are we communicating to? Well, we're communicating to the suppliers, right? These suppliers are the folks that are manufacturing the window package, for example. It might be the lumber company that's actually gonna, or the truss company that's actually gonna assemble the trusses. All those things have to be communicated from the GC, or from the drawings, rather, from the drawings and the architecture team, the design team, down to the GC, to the subs, to the suppliers, so on and so forth. The other person that we're going to be communicating to is the building officials. So the people that are actually going to give us the permits. They need to know, is this building actually complying with building code? Is it complying with zoning? All those drawings get submitted to the permit office for permitting. So it's really important to be able to communicate through a really good set of drawings all of this information that we've spent so much time gathering and so much time designing. Yeah, so and that's a really important point. That's why we were talking about zoning so early in the process, because we've started to hang our hat on that information as we're going through, and really the building officials are just checking that at the end. Now sometimes in pre-design, schematic design, I'll actually reach out to the building officials to make sure that I'm interpreting that zoning correctly. But just know that that building official needs to understand that we're meeting those height regulations, or that area that, you know, if you can't build above a certain area, they need to have that on a piece of paper with a stamp that says, yes, this is going to work, or this is in compliance with that zoning. Okay, so what should you expect when it comes to construction drawings or construction documents? And I think that's another important thing to distinguish here. When we talk about construction documents, we really are talking about drawings or construction drawings and specifications. So it's those two things that make up the construction documents. But what does that look like? What do the drawings actually look like? Well, I think the basics that you're probably familiar with are, of course, a floor plan. You know, you're going to need that roof plan. You're going to need to understand how the roof's sloping, how the water's getting drained off of it. Building section. So a building section is a cut through the building vertically, so we can see all those assemblies, you know, how the floor and the walls and the roof are all being connected. That really is kind of the heart of how it's actually going to be constructed. So building sections are going to be really important. You may see wall sections. So wall sections are just a zoomed in version of that building section, where we're zooming in to how those finishes are going to interact with the wall, how that wall is actually going to interact with that specific floor joist or whatever it is. Again, we're digging down into those details. We've already solved it from a pragmatic standpoint. Now we're just communicating how all that stuff gets put together. And then, of course, once you're through building sections, wall sections, schedules, all sort of, depending on the complexity of the job, it's going to range. A lot of the projects that we do are hundreds of pages of drawings that communicate all that information. If it's a really complex project, it could be even higher than that. So what does this actually account for? I think it's important at this stage to really understand the difference between buying a set of plans versus what we've just gone through. So when you buy a set of plans, you really are just buying a set of construction drawings, and a lot of times they're pretty limited in terms of what drawings and what information is actually on it. And they're limited, of course, because it's not specific to the site, it's not specific to the zoning, it's not specific to the building code, it's not specific to what your needs are. So you're really just buying something that's just set. And I think that's obvious, but I think the other important distinction here is that when you're hiring an architect for their services, you really are hiring for services. They're doing something specific for you, for your site. And the CDs, or the construction documents, or the construction drawings that we're going to use to communicate, is the product of that service. And it really only accounts for about 30% of the whole design budget, the whole budget for the architect. So it's really just a small piece of what you're seeing. So if you're working with an architect, you're getting some numbers, they're putting together a design budget for you. When you see that number, just know that they're probably going to put together a pretty complex set of drawings for you, but it's also just a portion or just a fraction of the whole service. And again, when we talk about timeline, it's kind of a broken record. A lot of times we're talking a couple months, 2 to 3 months, pretty common. So if we're doing something pretty complex, doing a really complex house, maybe it's worth millions of dollars, then we're probably going to be in 9 months total just between SD, DD, and CD. It could be that long. So if you're planning on doing something and you think it's going to be pretty complex, I would go ahead and bet that you might be in the 6 to 9 month range depending on that complexity. Okay, so we've done the design, right? We've gone through the pre-design, we've understood the feasibility, we've done the schematics, we understand the concept, we understand what it's going to look like, we understand how we're going to build it, we've created a complex set of documents that's going to communicate all that, and now you don't even need your architect anymore, right? Well, no, that's totally wrong. Okay, so construction administration is the hardest sell for any architect, hands down. A lot of times what I see is clients coming to me and saying, what do I need to pay you for to be involved in construction, because I'm paying the builder, their fee or their percentage to actually execute the project. Well, I think it's important to understand the distinction between construction management and construction administration, which is what we're talking about here. So construction management versus construction admin. Construction management is about the methods and materials to execute the design. So it's methods. How are we going to do this? And organizing logistics to actually assemble that design. Whereas construction administration is more about interpretation. So construction administration is about interpreting the design, or interpretation. So why is that important? Why is interpreting the design so important? Well, at the beginning of construction, the person that knows the most about your project is your architect. They know the most about it because they're generalists. The specialists kind of stay within their box. The structural engineer knows everything there is to know about the structure of your home. The MEP knows everything there is to know about the plumbing and the electrical and the mechanical of your home. But the architect has coordinated and walked through that design with those specialists. So the generalist on the design side knows the most about that project, at least at first. So the general contractor, I think it's important to understand here, the general contractor almost has an impossible task to go through. The general contractor has to know so much about this design that they have to communicate it with those suppliers, with those subcontractors, using the drawings, of course. But sometimes when you're looking at hundreds of pages of drawings, you're going to miss something. And they're expected to digest all this information and then go out and actually communicate that to other folks. Going back to pre-design, this is one of the reasons why I said having a general contractor involved so early in the process is so important. Because if they got involved during the CD, or maybe the drawings went out for permits and they're just now getting involved in this design, they have to digest all that information and communicate it. And what happens on every project is there's misinterpretations between the design and the suppliers, the design and the subcontractors, and even the design and the general contractor. So the way this works is the general contractor, the GC, receives the drawings and submits those drawings to their subs and suppliers. So that plumber has to digest that information to be able to actually do that plumbing job. That framer has to digest that information to be able to frame that house. That supplier, let's say it's the truss company, has to be able to digest that information to actually fabricate that truss. So when it comes to the supplier side, the supplier is, let's just use the truss company as an example. They're going to take our drawings that the GC submitted to them, and they're going to put together a set of drawings that shows how to actually fabricate that truss. So that's what we call shop drawings. Every time I've seen a set of shop drawings, I mean almost every time I've seen a set of shop drawings, I have seen misinterpretations, just mistakes. It's not that they're a bad supplier, it's just that it's a complex project. There's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of information in here. There's bound to be something that goes wrong. So the supplier submits those shop drawings. This is the trusses that we're actually going to build. This is how we're going to fabricate it. Submits those to the general contractor for his approval or her approval. That general contractor has to know as much information as the architect to really approve that. So if it's a smart general contractor and if it's a smart owner, what they would do is they would put the architect or the design team in place to help avoid as many misinterpretations as possible. That way, when those drawings for those trusses get fabricated, when they come out to the site, there's not going to be a truss that doesn't work. Okay, so we dove into kind of the complexity and the difficulty that the general contractor has when it comes to drawing misinterpretation and not knowing as much about the design whenever the construction starts. But what are the specific services inside of construction administration? Well, we've already talked about one of them, and that's that shop drawing review. So reviewing shop drawings is a big part of CA. The other thing is site visits. So going out to the site or site observations, going out to the site and helping the contractor work through any problems that arise. This is construction. No drawings are perfect. No building's perfect. Having your architect there to help you think through those variables is an important part of this. But we're also doing misinterpretations even in the field. You know, there's people out there, they're framing the house, they're putting in HVAC. There could be a misinterpretation at a detail level. So us coming out there, you know, once a week is usually pretty common. That's going to be important. I said week, it's week. Okay, so the third service that's involved in construction administration is what we call submittals. So submittals are simply changes to the products inside the design that the general contractor is requesting. Now this comes in the form of just an RFI, so sometimes they'll submit a request for information, sometimes they'll submit a submittal where they want to replace one product or another, maybe because they're more familiar with a product. But what we do is we just take that information from that submittal and just compare it to the overall design. I think it's important to understand that construction is extremely difficult, or at least it can be, and having the right team in place is vital to execute a design and the construction. No build is perfect, no drawings are perfect, but as a team with great relationships, you can tackle anything. If you have a specific project that you're thinking about and you need a little bit of help, maybe some consultation, we do also offer consultation services. And if we can't help you, at least I can steer you in the right direction. Here at c.w. Architects, we're committed to great relationships that create great projects. To get started, go and fill out the contact form at the link below. There you'll find a free consultation from me. If you're not quite ready for a consultation yet, there's also a link below that'll sign you up for our custom home starter kit. This is just a series of emails to help you through the process, regardless of whether you use our services or not. At the end of this email series, you'll receive a final checklist that'll help you through your journey. You can take that checklist and work with any builder or any architect that you see fit. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you in the next video.